Okay, let's continue with our topic, the global turning point. So in linguistic history, there has been always a turning point that can make it possible the rise and the fall of a certain language. For example, we've talked about the rise of Latin language as an example that resulted from the rise of a Roman Empire. And also we talked about the Greek language, and the reason for the Greek language to become the lingua franca at that time was the rise of the Alexander the Great, who took control at that time the region with the military power. Then we have the question, what will be the next future, the global turning point that can reshape the linguistic picture and also affect the position of English as a global language? So in this regard, that we have introduced our textbook author, the Krista Davis, the three topics. The first topic is the political development that has occurred since the 1940s. And second one is the English could become a common language because of a human desire to access the knowledge of UK and the USA. And David Krista also raised the issue of the local identity versus taken for granted status. So first, what is the political development that have developed since the 1940s? As you know, we had the World War II in the early 20th centuries. Then the result was a lot of independent states, particularly in Africa, and they had to make a choice, a linguistic choice, because they had to decide whether to continue to use the English as their official language, or they should return to their local languages. So why do they had to struggle to make a linguistic choice? The reason was clear. At that time, the African countries, they have too many languages within one country in many cases. For example, in one African country, there is hundreds of different languages, so divided into different tribes, so they couldn't communicate even though they are living in the same country. So what they need after gaining independence from colonial rule by France or British or Portuguese, they wanted a unifying language of communication. They can talk to each other. In many cases, English came in as a neutral language as a solution. So many of African countries who become independent after World War II, they chose English language as their common official languages. So this could be the reason that certainly the number of the English speakers as foreign language or the secondary language has expanded rapidly, and it happened after 1940s and 1960s. Then the second thing that David Krista mentioned as a reason for the rapid spread of English around the global society was the global society's need to access the knowledge that was led by the UK and the USA. As we have discussed, that USA has emerged as the global society's leaders in the finance or in every manufacturing sector. So UK manufacturing sector. So if you want to do business, anyone in the global society want to do business or make a shipment, or they want to attend the international political forum, they had to speak English to access the global society that was led by English language. And the third reason is the third global turning point that the author mentioned was the issue of the conflicting need for the local identity and take for granted status. So let me, in this regard, that we must think about what are the dangers of using English language as a common world language. So we have so far discussed that English was useful enough for the global society to use because it served as a unifying medium of communication, and also English was a means to access the U.S. leadership in economy and the business and advertising and all the other manufacturing sector. On the other hand, however, we must think about, is there any kind of danger or risk about using only one language as the world common languages? So in this regard, the textbook author suggests 3 risks or dangers involved in the use of monolanguage for the global society. The first one was a so-called linguistic arrogance. What is linguistic arrogance? For example, if you are a native speaker, then you would take advantage of using your mother tongue language when you attend the international forum or whenever you write a report, English report, then it will take much less time and effort to write English report than the other speakers who are using English as foreign and the second language. So maybe the mother tongue English speakers may feel arrogant about their linguistic superiority. And second risk that is involved with the using of English as the global language is the so-called the linguistic complacence. So the mother tongue speakers, they feel complacent about their fluency of English, so they may have thought that why I should bother to learn the other local languages. So in 1970s and 80s, Americans used to be one of the top outbound travelers around the world. At that time, American travelers, they didn't bother to learn the local languages, and their attitude was, in many cases, so I'm speaking English and take it or not. So the most Americans, they dismissed the chance to learn the foreign languages. Of course, nowadays there's a lot of changes. Americans' awareness, because they are aware of the need to learn the local languages as a foreign traveler or foreign international businessman. And the third danger that our textbook author mentioned was linguistic death. So, for example, if there is a dominant language to continue to use, then it is likely to result in the death of the local language. So, in another word, that a local language could diminish, and they can die out as a result of using too much dominant language. So, for example, and 2 decades ago, one of our famous linguistic scholars even suggested with Korean, we should learn only Korean and English language instead of Korean languages. And it proved very controversial, and it triggered a lot of stiff resistance and opposition from different groups. But this is an example that if with the use of dominant language, that a local language may be endangered to die out, So this example is the use of the Hebrew language. Hebrew language that they did not use for 2,000 years as the Jewish people were scattered around the world without having the state. So Hebrew language was about to die out. And there was one Jewish, the linguistic scholar, that is Ben. Then he initiated to revive the Hebrew language from the near death of his linguistic life. So, on the other hand, however, the English as a global language also is a very stimulating effects for some people that so people are more aware of the need to protect their own language against the dominance of English. So for example, is the language of Welsh or the Gaelic. The Welsh or Gaelic is the branch languages of Celtic. So as the people in Wales, they began to be aware of the growing need to protect, to keep their own local language, Gaelic language, alive. Because they felt threatened by the dominant use of English. They felt that they something must be done to save their own language from the risk of linguistic death. So that's why the people in Wales, they decided to give a special status to the Gaelic language. And also the Maori people in New Zealand, they decided to give a special status to their local language that the Maori people used to use. So these are the examples that the use of the English as a dominant language. Sometimes they give a lesson to other people. They make the people to be more aware of the need to protect their own languages. So let's get back to our question about the global turning point. Then our topic is what is the future of our English. Then we are going to see it from the perspective of a global turning point. So when we are curious about the future destiny of English, so we must, first of all, I think it's better to ask the question, what can hinder the future growth of English? Maybe there is a challenge in the balance of power that can make other languages to take over English position. For example, there is an emerging power countries like in Asia or Brazil. So maybe is it going to reshape the linguistic scenes so that the people can have a loyalty to another language instead of English? And also we can consider also political factors that may make English under pressure. And also there is a need to express community identity that can also hinder the ability of English to function as a global language. And also we cannot ignore the fact that the rejection of English. So actually this happened. People of certain countries, they feel antagonistic, they feel against about English, and they reject English as an official or a foreign language. For example, there was sometimes a strong reaction against the language of the former colonial power. So let's take an example. If you're a writer in Korea, then you have some dilemma. So should we write in English language? Then you can reach a global fans if you write a novel or a poem in English. But if you choose to write in Korean, on the other hand, however, if you choose to write your novel in English, that may sacrifice your own cultural identity as Korean. And this is often the dilemma that the writers in Irish or Korea or Japan, they would often face. So the writers in outer circle countries often face this dilemma. And actually, there is the hindrance cases. So there are some embracing cases, and also there are rejecting cases. Embracing cases, the cases of embracing English as their official language, we can find that most of the former colonies of the British Empire, especially in Africa, they have stayed with English. We have already discussed the reason. At that time, most of the African country, they have too many local languages. So they need a neutral language that can unify the different languages from the different tribes. So the English was a very useful medium of communication. However, there are some rejecting cases. For example, the Tanzania English used to be jointly official with its local language until 1967. However, the English was deprived of its position as the local language became the sole national languages. We have another case in Malaysia, for example. There is a law that they gave sole status to Malay language and destroying English as a joint official language. Then we might be curious, so what would be the impact of these rejection cases on the status of the English position? So our textbook author says that such rejection were sufficiently small that even in total, there have been little impact on the status of English as a whole. So in other words, he is optimistic, even though there is some minor cases of rejecting the English, but the English is still well and alive and is likely to survive as the common world language. So we have another hindrance case here, because if you are living in the contemporary global society, you might ask, does it make sense to spend money in learning English? Even if our economic future is operating more on a regionally than globally. So for example, how about Latin America? Latin America, the official language of all the Latin America countries is Spanish. Of course, there are exceptions of 3 countries. The Brazil, Suriname, and the French Guiana are the only 3 countries in Latin America who does not use English and who does not use Spanish as their official language. So in this case, so it doesn't make sense for the Latin American people try to spend money and time trying to learn English, even though they know well that they have no chance of doing business, they have no chance of to try to access American leadership, they had no chance of talking to American people for business or political purpose. And also another case is the countries of North America is similar. So they will be happy and content to stay with Arabic. Arabic is a regional lingua franca for the countries in North Africa. The same is true with the people who is speaking the Hindu, Russian, and German, and they are the other examples of regional lingua franca. And if they do not have the global contact, they have no reason to try to learn English, and they will be happy with their regional lingua franca, Hindu, Russian, and German. So here comes a third solution is here. How can we avoid a conflict? And that is a take it and eat it approach. For example, so in the global society, in the linguistic society, we have a conflict desire. On the one hand, we want to promote ethnic language. For example, if you are Korean, that we'd like to keep our English beautiful, stay healthy and alive. On the other hand, however, we Koreans, they want to learn common language as English. So these are the conflict of our desire for the common local identity, and also we are also desire to learn the standard English so that we can increase our intelligibility with the global society. So these are the conflicting needs about our linguistic desire. Then is there any compromise between this conflicting demand? So the third solution is take it and eat it. So what does it mean? For example, if your people travel by cab to the international conference, then you'll be traveling, then you will take a cab, then you will talking the local variety of English. Then if you are buying them, if you are in the traditional local market to buy something to eat, then you will be talking at the local variety of English. But when you meet at the conference table, then you will switch into the standard English. So in this way, you don't have to give up your national linguistic identity, because and also you'll be able to speak the standard English. This is the take it or eat approach that many of the, for example, the Chinese or Korean and Japanese will take it. In another word, they are speaking the 2 varieties of English. On the one hand, they are speaking the standard English, British English for intelligibility. In other words, they are trying to speak the British English to make themselves understood by the other speakers among the native speakers. On the other hand, however, they can switch to their local varieties of English, like Chinglish or Konglish and Chinglish. So in this way, that you can use the language as a means to express your local identity. So this is so-called diglossic English. Diglossic English, for example, in the Philippines, people are speaking two spoken varieties of English. On the one hand, they are speaking standard American English, and on the other hand, they are also local variety like Taglish. So the standard English and the local variety, they coexist peacefully in the Philippines. So we have also another question. Is there any other countries emerging to challenge the US power as a global power? Then what does it mean for the linguistic consequences? Then people would look elsewhere and people would have loyalty to different language. But how about the position of our textbook author? He says that even though the entire English-speaking population of Canada decided to switch to French, for example, the impact would not be significant. In other words, of course, there were some countries which are trying to switch to other countries. Maybe English position may be weakened, but on the global scale, the impact would be insignificant. We can ignore the impact here. This is also textbook author's position. In fact, this number is interesting. There is a reversal of a ratio between the native speakers and non-native speakers. So for example, in the 1960s, there used to be more L1 speakers than L2 speakers. What does it mean? Only 5 decades ago, there used to be much more mother tongue English speakers than the speakers of English as a foreign or secondary English speakers. And something must have happened here in the middle. Then now the ratio has reversed to 1:3, right, in favor of L2 speakers. So what does it mean? Now in the global society, there are much more English speakers as a secondary language or foreign language than the mother tongue English speakers. In other words, there is much more speakers in the countries of extending circle countries rather than the speakers who belong to the inner circle countries. So David Gradle suggests an interesting number here. He said the share of the world's population who have English as a first language will decline from over 8% in 1950 to less than 5% in 2050. This is very interesting. Please remember, English is a global language in the contemporary global society. However, that means that there is one in every 3 world population can speak or use the English language, even though it is a different level of fluency. However, we must remind that there are still 2/3 of the world population who cannot speak or cannot use English. So the future of English, it depends much on what happens in the populous countries like China, Russia, Japan, Indonesia, and Brazil. So let's get back to our main point is there here. We have talked about the 19th and 20th global turning point that has made it possible English to become the global language. We have talked about political development in African countries. So many of the African countries, they had to adopt English as their national language, as a bonding power, bonding medium. And also we talked about issues of the conflicting need for the local identity versus the intelligibility. But now we are interested in figure out what are the next global turning point. In other words, are there any another global turning point in the post-21st century global society that may reverse or not the balance of global power? These are the major topic that we want to discuss. So the question is, are there any game-changing events or trends that are transforming the world? And also this can lead to another question: what are the implications of these global turning points on the English position as a global language? Also, we can also ask, is it facing any challenges from other languages spoken by peoples who are emerging as new power potential? So let's examine what are the first global turning point is here. The global turning point first, the world economy is out of balance. And the increase in global contact, it will need more translators or common language. These are the major topics for the global point one. So world economy is out of balance. What does it mean? As you know, the UK and the USA used to be the growth engine of the economy for the global society. The Britain was the birth of industrial evolution, and the USA was the second growth momentum as it leads in every industries that affect our daily life in media, print, and advertising, and transportation. But now, in the recent decades, there is something strange happening. The growth momentum of rich countries like the UK and the USA has slowed. On the other hand, the emerging countries like Brazil, India, China, they are rising. So, for example, the rich countries, they are running large trade deficit. They are exporting much less than they are importing. How about emerging countries? Emerging economies, most of the emerging countries, they are enjoying large surpluses. In other words, they are exporting much more than they are importing. So let's see this picture. For example, USA is the world's largest debtor country, and China is the world's largest lender country. So the U.S. government is issuing a lot of sovereign bond, and the major buyer of the U.S. issued sovereign bond, for example, is China. So, and also the China's economy is very important, and the global society, the world economy depends on the strength or weakness of China's economy. If China's economy falters a little, that will shake the rest of the world's economy. And also, U.S. economy depends much on the growth of China. Also, much of the U.S. economic growth depends on China's consumerism. So China's consumers should buy a lot of things if they are to help revive the U.S. economy or sustain the U.S. economy. So there is a strange reversal of the economic growth. There was a shifting from the US and the UK-led world economy to China. So how about emerging economies? After 2 decades of economic growth, the emerging economies, they are flexing their financial muscle because they own 2/3 of foreign exchange reserves. And also it is notable that there is a rising international business contact. So only a few decades ago, it was hard to find any multinational companies who are doing business on a global level in the emerging market was almost impossible. However, in recent decades, the emerging market is seeing a growing number of multinational companies that are expanding around the world. So as of 2010, for example, they represented 25% of the largest 500 companies in the world. And it's very intriguing to find that the rising international contact will create the demand for a common language English, or will it create the demand for a translator? This is an interesting topic for us to discuss. So discussion question is in Korean case. In Korea, they spend a record amount of money in learning English. Then the question is, we should continue to spend billions of dollars in learning English, or should we continue to depend on human translators for international context? So our textbook author has mentioned, but there is a 100-year battle of translator versus global languages here. So who will take over, human translator, or will be the global language will take over? As I also studied the translation, I'm also teaching the translation students, then I personally feel that the translation market has been rapidly shaping in the past decades. When I was studying in the Graduate School of Interpretation, we thought that how can we find a job? Maybe we will not be able to find a job because the translation and interpretation market will be under shrinkage. However, it didn't happen as we had expected. So we must divide the translation market into the three segments. The high-end translation market would be, I would say, that is the conference interpreter, and the lowest end of translation market is the guide translation or the guide translation. And I personally experienced that the low and the mid-end market has rapidly disappeared for the professional translators. Why? Because there are a lot of volunteer English speakers and English writers who are willing to provide this translation or interpreting services without being paid. However, when it comes to the highest end of translation market for the conference interpreter, that the market will remain prosper, and it continues to grow. Why? Because there is a growing number of international conferences held in worldwide, and there is a sustainable demand growth for the professional translators. So it's interesting that our textbook author said it will be a battle 100 years from now. So it's to see whether the presence of English will eliminate the demand for word translation service. In another word, if English use is so often used, so we no longer use the translation service. Or the other picture possible is whether automatic translation is available so cheaply and so easily, everybody can use automatic translation, so you don't have to learn the global language English, which will come true in the next decades. That will be the interesting case. So back to the translation market. Then in the translation community, they always trying to differentiate from professional translators and amateur translators. As I said, if you are the amateur translators, if you're part-time translators, I think there is they are expecting to see a reduction in the market demand, and there is no hope of gaining financial gains from amateur translators. But when it comes to professional translators for the conference interpretation and the international political forum and a lot of academic community meetings and cultural events, international tourism events, and this is the market, the professional translators will continue to be needed on the market. So in this regard, the Professor Gonzalez said that what's the difference between the professional translator and amateur translator? Professional translator should be a cultural mediator and computer expert or a marketer or multilingual expert. And also professional translator is a problem solver and should be flexible and it should have intellectual curiosity. And also, when we hear the TED site, then there is an intriguing idea from one of the speakers, Luis von Ahn, and his speech titled "The Massive Scale Online Collaboration." He presented a very interesting business model. He said, we don't have to pay for translation. Let them study. There is a global network of people, global society. They want to learn English, and let them study English by translating text. So you don't have to pay for the translation. We can use the volunteer English speakers and writers, translators. So his business model is to build a global network of learning and translating English at the same time. This is a very challenging idea if you want to work for the professional translator, and it's interesting to figure out how it would turn his very brave business initiative, how it would turn out. So the discussion question is, there is economic center of gravity. Is it now shifting from the US to Asia, an emerging company, and emerging countries? So is this signal to shift the linguistic center of gravity to move from English to Chinese or India? These are the next topic that we are going to discuss.